What's going on, guys? Welcome back to the Hands-On channel. I hope you have made it through the Arctic blast unscathed. Here in my area, we got 4 to 6 inches of snow, and 3 days ago it was 75 degrees. I was working outside with a t-shirt. I poured concrete like 5 days ago, so hopefully my concrete project turned out all right because the bottom dropped out. It got down to a low of like 16 degrees here. And it's been kind of hovering around in the teens for the past few days, and really windy, really cold. The kind of snow that came down here was this really small crystallized snow that blows around like crazy, this dusty snow. So we've got snow drifts all over the place. We've had, I'm sure, a lot of different accidents and people getting their cars stuck down in ditches and stuff. But honestly, I didn't leave the house for the past couple of days because I just put off anything, any work that came in. I put that off until the snow comes, until the snow crew's allowed to get out there and clean the roads up and stuff because, my customers understand that, it's not worth risking your equipment and stuff like that, and your life to go out in this kind of weather. But every time this stuff comes up, it never fails that immediately my mind goes into like this survival mode, and I start thinking, what would I do if the power suddenly went off? And, maybe it's not anything to do with Klaus Schwab or the cyber polygon or the complete system going down, but what if it's just like a localized event where, the power station, the substation gets hit so hard that it knocks your power out for a week in this kind of weather where it's, in the teens. And, how would you heat yourself? How would you, do the basic stuff to survive in wintertime? Because I really believe, I was telling my wife the other day that, as miserable as it is when it's 106 degrees outside or whatever, even 110, you can always find a shade tree to get underneath, or you can, pour some water on yourself. You can do things to cool yourself down. And it's, not the end of the world if you can't turn your power on during the middle of a heat wave. It's a bad deal. Don't get me wrong. It's miserable, but you're not going to die from it more than likely if you take it easy and you go slow and you don't overexert yourself and you hydrate and you stay in front of a fan or under a shade tree and you wear the proper attire. You're probably going to be just fine and you're going to get through that. So, in my opinion, the most challenging time for someone to survive is in the winter months. Now, I live in a state that's, pretty tepid climate. It's not super cold here. We don't have super cold winters. And like I said, just 3 or 4 days ago, it was 75 degrees. So I was out there pouring concrete and doing stuff like that, doing projects. So most of the time, we don't get really severe winters here. But when we do, it really hits everybody below the belt because we're not expecting it. We're not used to it, and especially when you have these drastic swings in temperature and precipitation, stuff like that. So anyways, it always gets my mind to turning about survival and how would I survive here? And part of my problem is I actually do have one wood stove, but it's out hooked up in my shop building, and my shop building is uninsulated. So you have to feed that thing constantly and you have to stay right in front of it. That's basically how it works when it gets super cold like that. So I actually do have a contingency plan. If something happened, my wife and I could go out there in the shop and, set up a cot or, set up something, some kind of a mattress on the floor, and then kind of make a little boxed in area around it where the heat would kind of get trapped right there in that one area. We've got enough different cabinets and random sheets of insulation and stuff like that, and plywood and things like that I'm sure we could box ourselves in well enough where we wouldn't freeze to death. So I do have that going for me, but it always makes me regret not having a wood stove hooked up in this house here. If you don't know, my wife and I, we've bought this land and we're actually planning on developing it into a farm, if nothing else, a small farm homestead. We want to grow our own food and stuff like that. So I was telling her, I was like, it makes absolute sense in my mind. And of course, you got to remember this in the middle of the summer when it's warm, but you got to remember these moments like this when you're vulnerable. And it makes absolute sense in my mind that our next house that we build it around a wood stove. The wood stove is the centerpiece of the house, and it really should be centrally located. It doesn't have to be smack dab in the middle of your house, but it would be better if it's centrally located, because then that heat is going to radiate out and spread out throughout the house a lot easier than if it's on, like, say, the north wall, which is going to suck that heat right out of that north wall. So I was telling her that, just to me, that makes total sense, to set your entire house up, build your house around a wood stove and a hearth and all that stuff, and, you know, think a lot about it. You know, if you've got a concrete floor, that's good, you know, but build it up so that you've got a concrete battery all the way around it, or a big rock stone wall or a brick stone wall behind it, so that it holds that heat in that wall. Hearths aren't just for looking at and, you know, looking pretty. They serve a purpose. They absorb that heat into that stone or rock or concrete or whatever you decide to use, or blocks even, but they absorb that heat and then radiate that out as the fire dies down in the wood stove. And I just think those are things that most people rarely ever think about. And every time it hits me when one of these big mega snowstorms comes, I'm like, oh yeah, I've got to do this, I've got to do this. And then by the middle of July, I'm like, I'm not even thinking about a wood stove at that point. So that's kind of the problem with us humans, is that we live in the moment, in the season. And so I wanted to make this video not only for you guys, but for myself, so that when I look back on this one day, I can be like, oh yeah, you know, I'm watching this video maybe in the middle of June or July, and it's 108 degrees. The last thing I'm thinking about is a wood stove, but that's more than likely the time I'm going to be building the house. So, because those are the warmer working months where I can do that sort of stuff. So it's paramount that you guys think about cold weather survival. And another thing that I think about, and I've got a pretty good amount of cold weather survival gear, as far as clothing and stuff, and attire, and, you know, sleeping bags and stuff like that. But I could bolster that up a little bit. And something I never knew until, you know, because I've talked about this in other videos. I grew up in kind of the flatlands, but my wife and I, for a short while, we owned a place up in the Rocky Mountains. And just being out there in that country, you deal with those cold survival moments a lot more. So one of the things that I never knew about was that, I can't remember what they call people from the flatlands, but it was something like cotton cowboys or something like that, or cotton something. But it basically means that we're ignorant, because we don't know that cotton, you know, your jeans that you're wearing or whatever, or any kind of cotton attire, actually sucks the heat out of your body. What you want in a really cold weather environment is like wool or something like that, or animal fibers, or, you know, something like that that's going to not suck the heat out of your body and not get wet and stay wet. You know, we've all done it. We all wear t-shirts, you know, you wear that t-shirt, or socks even. Here lately, yesterday I was out here, I put some really warm socks on, and just walking around and being out in the shop, moving around, when I came inside the house, my feet were wet from sweating, and I didn't even notice it when I was out there moving, because they were warm, you know. But as soon as I took those boots off, I was like, oh man, my feet are all saturated and wet from sweating, and I didn't even notice. So that's one of the most dangerous things in cold environments, is that, you know, getting wet like that, and then you don't notice it until you stop moving. And, you know, unless you have a fire, you're going to get cold really quick. So just, people need to think about things in a lot different way. You know, you need to have a generator. I've actually got 2 big generators. I don't know if you can see it or not, but I've got my tailgater generator, the Harbor Freight one. It stopped producing power. So in an upcoming video, we're going to replace the, I don't know what it is, AVR or whatever they call it, the capacitor inside of it, I think has gone bad. So we're going to order one of those and see if we can't fix this thing up, because I love that little generator, because it's a little quieter, uses less fuel. And if you're just running lights and smaller things, charging phones and things like that, it's perfect. I've even run like my grinder and things like that on it. But the way I think I blew out the capacitor was I actually tried to run a circular saw, and it was a bit too much for it. It stopped producing power. So I assume I blew up the capacitor, and we're going to order a new one of those and get that going. But those are the kinds of things that, if you know what components typically break on the generator, then you can go ahead and order those up in advance, And like this time when I order this capacitor for this thing, I'm going to order 2 of them because, I mean, once I prove, usually you can look at them, and if they're swollen up, you can tell, okay, that capacitor has gone bad. And I'm going to take a look at it first before I order them, just to make sure that that's what the problem is. But if that turns out to be the problem, then I'm going to order 2 of those things. Or if there's like a fuse somewhere inside of there, then I'm going to get extra fuses, because the last thing you want to happen, trust me, the last thing you want to happen is to be off grid, not by choice, because the power company, the lines are down or whatever, and then suddenly your generator won't start up. So you have to have all the components that you may need to, to replace and change out to get the generator going without having to leave the house. That's ideally the situation. Because what if you did leave the house? Like these generator capacitors, you can't buy these locally. You have to order them online. So it's one of these deals. You're better to have this stuff in advance and not ever need it. But one of the things I want to do, I've got this jacket here. It's got like a goose down or something inside of it. It's super warm. But like I said, I've got a lot of cotton pants and things like that. So I want to invest in like some either synthetic thermal underwear, that kind of deal, long johns, or I'll probably buy a couple of pairs of pants that are just for cold weather. They've got these jeans and stuff now that are lined with a synthetic material or wool lined, if you want to spend the money on that, and that will keep you warm, keep you from freezing to death. Probably wouldn't be a bad idea to have like a sub-zero sleeping bag, or a couple of them, 1 per member of your family, just in case something happens. One of the worst things that happens during these long-term power outages is that if you can't keep your house warm, inevitably when the power comes back on, you're going to have broken lines more than likely, especially if you have copper. If you have PEX, that's a little more forgiving on your plumbing, but if you have copper lines and that house gets to 19 degrees inside of there, when that power does come back on, everything's going to probably burst. All your lines are going to burst. Your pipes are going to be frozen, stuff like that. It's going to be a bad deal. So it's best, if you can, keep your house up to above freezing. You don't have to necessarily keep it, 75 degrees like normal. If you can, go ahead and do that. But at very least, you need to try to keep it above freezing. And there's a lot of other alternative ways without power. You can get these little propane heaters. Now you have to be super careful about running those in enclosed spaces. You have to follow the directions and stuff like that, but there's lots of different ways. If you've got a generator or 2, you can run these little electric heaters, and it probably wouldn't be a bad idea to invest in a couple of those little 1500 watt, electric heaters. I've got this one that has like a big, it's like a pretty tall heater, and it's got this big orange, I don't know what in the heck to call it, but it kind of radiates the heat out of it. Instead of just having a single coil, it's got this big plate inside of there that heats up, and that thing really heats up a room. Now, you couldn't use it probably for heating a whole house, but you could heat a room with it, which would keep you and your wife and your kids or whatever from freezing to death. These are all things you need to think about. If you're in an area and you have access to wood, firewood and stuff like that, especially if you can go harvest it for cheap or free, maybe off a buddy's land or a relative's land or something like that, and get with some builders in your local area when they're going in there and dozing down, 10s and 20 acre, 30 acre, whatever, when they're dozing it down to build a new development, go in there and get with them, and maybe you can get some of that firewood for cheap or free. So those are things to have, obviously, but you have to have a wood stove and the pipe running through the roof and all that stuff. That needs to be done professionally. Unless you know what you're doing, you need to hire somebody to do that, just to make sure you don't have any leaks or any problems where you potentially could set a fire. And if you're going to have a wood stove, you have to go through the maintenance routine on it. You have to clean that pipe out every so often, depending on the type of the wood that you're burning. If you're burning mostly hardwoods and oaks and stuff like that, it's going to be a lot less often than if you're burning pines and, other softer woods. And that's regional. If you're up in the Rocky Mountains, pretty much all they burn is fir and pine and stuff like that. That really blew my mind, because in this country where I'm from, nobody burns any softwoods. It's hardwoods only. That's the only thing. And if you start reading about wood stove performance and stuff like that, you get a heck of a lot more BTUs off of a piece of oak than you do off of a piece of pine, just because the pine burns up so much faster. So these are all things that you need to be thinking about and prepping for. What's your water plan? Do you have enough water stored up in jugs above ground, in your house somewhere, that are not going to freeze, that you'll be able to access if the power grid goes down for a long period of time like this. This is, I'm not trying to scare anybody. Anytime I do these prepping videos, that it's just to get you thinking about this sort of stuff. Hopefully it never happens. Hopefully that your power is all underground in your area and it never goes out, and it's always reliable and wonderful for you. But in my area, that's not the case. If it ices hard enough, or if the wind blows hard enough, and the weather gets cold enough at the same time, then power grids collapse all the time. Maybe not entirely, but sections of them go bad all the time. And it's good to be Johnny on the spot and already have a plan than to try to be figuring it out on the fly when your house is reaching freezing temperatures. So guys, this stuff can be deadly, as we saw last year down in Texas when their windmills froze up. I refer to that a lot because it's something that really stood out in my mind, that people nowadays are so dependent on the system that they will sit in their house and freeze to death if someone doesn't tell them how to do it or what to do. And I know, I get it. I get why people are doing that. They don't think about it because most of the time, like down in Texas, that's hardly ever a threat. But here's the deal. Sometimes it is a threat. So for that reason, it's better to be prepared than get caught with your pants down in, the worst snow or ice storm that your state has ever seen. So stay prepared, guys. Appreciate you tuning in. Let me know in the comments, is there anything else that people need to stock up on and have and be prepared? I would say also, along with generators, you need some power cords or some way to one of those generator switches that you can hook into your house. That way you can hook your generator in to all your circuits and stuff. That's an expensive endeavor. The way I do it is I just run cords through the window and then stuff towels around the window, and that's been good enough for us. Of course, one other thing on the way out, if it's this cold, you don't really have to worry about your freezer or your refrigerator. That's one good thing. If you have to, you can move your stuff out into coolers outside or something like that, but be careful that it doesn't freeze or the animals don't get into it, because that'd be terrible. So anyways, appreciate you tuning in. Hit me up if you got any suggestions down in the comments. I always love reading them. Until then, guys, I'll see you next time.